Well, hello and welcome to the Psychedelic Diaries. I am your host, Ray Christian. And do we have a show for you today? Dr. Glenn Hartelius, an award-winning researcher at CIIS, will be joining us momentarily for a deep dive and a soul search. As usual, we'll have two companies for some critique and some praise at the end of the show for a slap and a clap. And of course, we'll start the show with a nugget and a noodle. Producer Kevin is here, and he and I did a lot of drugs, so you don't have to. So please like and subscribe. Oh, come on, dude. I put myself on the spot too. All right, I'm moving along. Well, let's get started with a nugget and a noodle. And today's news nugget, feds funding fungi. For the first time in 50 years, the US government through the NIDA is funding a magic mushroom research study. Hallelujah. It'll be a study at Johns Hopkins to see if magic mushrooms can help people quit smoking. My, how far we have come. And as for the noodle, something I've been noodling on is how often to engage psychedelic sessions. Of course, every person is different, but even each person is different in their own needs, and that shifts over time. For some people like myself, once a month was right for a while, and now I need more of a buffer. Others like Jim Fadiman say once every 6 months at most in terms of a buffer. So what might be causing these fluctuations? And I have a hunch there are two factors, change and creativity. For instance, if you need to apply more change and creativity in your life, maybe more frequent sessions are appropriate. Or perhaps you're dealing with tough negotiations or more repetitive work. In that scenario, maybe less frequent. Something to noodle on. Well, that's it for the nugget and the noodle. Producer Kevin, are we all properly synced up with Dr. Hartelius? Ladies and gentlemen, if I may direct your attention, he is an award-winning scholar, researcher, psychologist, also a performance coach and professor at CIIS, Dr. Glenn Hartelius. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, well, let's dive right in. Glenn, you have had a remarkable career. You've been a writer, an editor, a speaker in psychology, and a lot of your focus has been within the transpersonal field. Dumb question. What does transpersonal mean? And how does it differ from psychedelics?
For one thing, it's a lot broader than psychedelics. So I'm actually part of a project where we have been identifying the emergence of a second wave in transpersonal psychology. The first wave was really focused on altered states of consciousness, but not just psychedelics, also those achieved through meditation, spiritual experiences, and so forth. But the second wave is really going back and saying, well, there's all these parts that regular psychology leaves out. These parts of the person, the inspiration, the intuition, the felt sense of the body, the deeper aspects of ourselves. And if we add those back in, if we do a whole person approach, how does that shift psychology? So transpersonal, in its sort of classic sense, was more focused on altered states. In its newer sense is like, well, if we add back all these altered states, instead of only looking at the human being through cognitive, processes, how does that change the psychological field? So, I mean, to me, this is almost like, well, if you add those back in, that's kind of like what psychology could have been from the beginning. So transpersonal to me is much bigger than psychedelics or even than altered states.
Interesting. So this second wave is a bit more comprehensive, a little bit more of a holistic approach. And it's more broad than, so psychedelics is kind of in the umbrella of transpersonal.
That's right. That's right. Because the thing is, if you look at, look, psychology has done a lot of great things. We've got a lot of good information, but it's mostly focused on how you think, how you behave, and how your neural structure relates to those two things. It totally leaves out a big part of our experience, because a lot of what happens for us is happening in the felt sense of the body. In other words, we have a sense of this, an impression of that. What motivates us, what inspires us is not, oh, click, 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 think, think, think. It's really has a lot to do with feelings that are below the level of what we notice. That is kind of like the big background, the big canvas on which there's this little part that we have thinking access to.
Ah, that's fascinating. This idea of the felt sense of the body. We'll chat about that a little bit later in the show, but it was kind of a game changer for me when you taught me that. And this idea of essentially, where is your attention? And speaking of which, one of my favorite Rumi quotes is that attention is the currency of the soul. And Glenn, if you don't mind going off into outer space with me for a second, sometimes I wonder if attention and consciousness and attraction and even gravity are all kind of the same thing at a philosophical level. But I loved your bio. It said, there was a quote, it says, he developed a novel, pragmatic way of describing attention. What does that mean?
Our attention is usually something that we're not conscious of. So it's like what we are conscious of is what our attention is on. So if somebody says, where's your attention? I'll go, well, it's on the window over there. I'm looking at that bird. But we're not aware of the attention itself. And the thing is that attention has two ends. It has the end that's on something, and it has the end that's me. And by becoming aware of the end of the attention that's me and learning how to regulate that, it gives us access to shifting our state of consciousness in a direct way that is very different than relying on, some induction process to get it to shift. It gives us it's like opening the control panel and going, wow, I didn't know I had these options.
Fascinating. Is it at the core of it, is it mindfulness of what you're doing with your attention and at a more frequent pace in everyday life?
You could say that, but it's not just when you say what you're doing with your attention, it's just not just where it's pointed at, it's where it's coming from in your body. And I know that doesn't make any sense, but for me, when I looked at what are the remarkable things, for example, both in history and in sort of human narratives, whether it's scriptural narratives or just stories of remarkable people, it's like these events always happen around a person, and that person always has access to something, right? It isn't that it just happens out of the blue. It happens around a person who has a particular kind of access. And that access has to do with when you change your state of consciousness, you change your relationship with the world. You change that dynamic. And so by being able to go, you know what, I need to change my relationship with the world in this particular way, it just opens doors. So for example, psychedelic experiences give access to that domain. But then learning how to manage your attention gives you mastery in that domain so that you have choices you didn't know that you had.
Wow. This is fascinating. The way you put that made me think of this exercise in meditation where they say, as you're sitting there and you're trying to essentially quiet the mind, acknowledge that thoughts are going to come, and those thoughts, see it as you are standing on this hill and there's a river in front of you, and see the thoughts as if they're this river that's passing in front of you. But critically, as you pointed out, like know where the attention is coming from, the different ways it can come from. Some thoughts, remember that they're not in that river that's right in front of you. Some of the thoughts can come from the stream behind you that also feeds into the river, and you don't see it, and yet it can be a thought that takes over.
Well, the other piece there is that information is not just about thoughts. Information is also what we perceive through the felt sense of the body. Information comes in the body's affect. So the point of quieting the mind is not just to leave the thoughts, it's to open the door to the felt sense perceptions, because there's so much information that comes in that way that's pre-verbal, that's nonverbal, that you don't even, that, you know, it's like it's taken me years to find ways to translate these felt experiences into language that can be effective in psychology.
Okay, Glenn, let's move along. We have a lot of topics to touch on. That one was fascinating. I'm curious, though, you're a busy man. You're a bit of a renaissance man, if you will. Your work with ketamine. And I'm curious, there's debate now about, is ketamine even a psychedelic, or is it just purely a dissociative? But it's obviously in the news a lot right now with these ketamine clinics and for the dramatic response to depression and treatment-resistant depression. From your take and the research you've done, do you think ketamine is essentially a Trojan horse for perhaps more powerful psychedelics? Or is it in the process of carving out its own long-lasting niche? And if so, what might that look like?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in the sort of gateway drug theory. I mean, that's kind of a slippery slope fallacy. So if you start taking Tylenol, pretty soon you're going to be on fentanyl. No, that's not what happens. Ketamine has its own particular properties and its own particular applications, and is really effective as an antidepressant. And one of the differences is, and I have to say, just from a personal point of view, that I struggled with depression for many years. And really with, you know, the first experience that I had with ketamine, I didn't even know that it was an antidepressant. But 4 or 5 days later, I started noticing that, you know, that thing that happens where my mood kind of drops and I just feel kind of discouraged because several things didn't work. And then it takes me a couple days to pull myself back up. That's not happening anymore. And it stayed that way for like almost a year. And then I did another ketamine session, and stayed that way again for about a year. Some people, a single dose, some people need to use it more regularly. But the thing is that what ketamine does, it addresses, see, depression is not just one thing. You know, we talk about SSRIs with being able to boost people's serotonin level, but it isn't just serotonin. There's different biochemical things that happen in the neural circuitry, that when with depression, that there are areas of the brain that actually shrink. And what ketamine does is it addresses a number of areas. So depression is a complex problem, and ketamine addresses it in a complex way with multiple mechanisms. And not only that, but if with SSRIs, which granted help a lot of people, no question about that, but you often have to wait, you know, 2 to 4 weeks or even a couple of months before you get the full effect. Whereas with ketamine, you get the full effect within a few hours. So if somebody's struggling with depression, it's like there's the possibility of having a real before and after, and having just kind of getting the assurance, wow, I'm not going to have to live with this experience for the rest of my life. And not only that, but it's actually working to normalize the brain structures that are associated and the imbalances that are associated with depression.
Wow.
So that is really different than what other psychedelics do. I mean, they can have some impact as well, but ketamine is particularly effective in that domain.
Glenn, that's the most articulate description about what ketamine does that I have heard to date. Thank you for that. And thank you for that personal share about your own battle with depression. I too have battled many years ago, and it changed me. So thank you for that. And I'm curious, Glenn, your work at the California Institute of Integral Studies is fascinating. And obviously you've got, of course, a very selective coaching business that you're building up and working on. I'm curious, for you, with all the experience you have, what do you think is a compelling way to compel skeptics to explore altered states of consciousness?
You know, we go through multiple states of consciousness every day, from sleep to that hypnopompic state between sleep and waking, to being awake, to perhaps daydreaming, to that moment when you suddenly drop into the zone and you're deep in your work, to when you're on a run and you get in flow. So we go through multiple states of consciousness every day. What psychology basically has not kept up with that. But that's really a cultural thing. Okay, so if we begin to see that our focus on the cognitive state, that singular cognitive state, is really a cultural lens that we have, not a scientific lens. And we can bring psychology into a more scientific location, not by taking things away, but by adding back these other states of consciousness. To me, that's the door. And, you know, not everybody is going to get on board with that right away. I mean, it's like, you're just not going to convince everyone. But as we do good quality research that includes these other states, whether it's achieved through meditation, through endurance exercise, through psychedelic substances, whatever it is, as we begin to learn how to do that research, I think that over time will be the biggest impact culturally.
So you just mentioned exercise, and you and I in a previous chat talked a little bit about this idea of moving to the felt sense of the body. And you showed me something that a small exercise that drastically improved my performance with sports that specifically need precision. For instance, my jump shot and my tennis serve, and it involves a light beam, a spark of light, the navel. Would you mind sharing with the viewers, the listeners?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So maybe you can do it with me.
I'll be your guinea pig.
Okay, great. So what I'd like you to do is just take one finger and touch it lightly right on the sternum, right in the center of the chest, and then take that finger away. And I'd like you to notice that when you take the finger away, you can still feel where the touch was. And then I'd like you to imagine that that little sensation that's still there is like a little point of light. So for some people, it'll be the sensation. Some people, it'll be the imagined point of light. And then just imagine that it's going to slide back a couple of inches into the center of your body. Not the front, not the back, but right in the middle, kind of right at the heart level. And just let it float back until you feel it right in front of your spine. And as you do that, I'd like you to notice whatever sounds are around you in the room. I'd like you to imagine that instead of those sounds coming to your ears, those sounds are coming to this little sensation, this little point of light in the center of the chest. And then I'd like you to imagine that the breath is coming right to this point. That as you inhale, you are this little point of light drawing in the breath. And you're this little point of light sensation, releasing the breath into the space around you. Let go of being behind your eyes, that you can just release and imagine that you are this little point of light, that all of the sensations of your body arriving here. Feel that you are this little sensation, this little point of light, receiving the sounds around you, receiving the breath as you inhale, releasing the breath as you exhale. And if that little point of light or that sensation starts to get a little fuzzier, just use your breath to bring it back to focus. When you're here, you can't be thinking in the conventional way, but the truth is that the movements that your body is making and the sensations that you are feeling through your whole body is a substitute for thinking. It's the body's way of thinking. So that as you move, you are the thinking body. You are the knowing body. As you go for that layup or that jump shot, those motions are your body in its intelligence. And because you are the body without distracting it with all of these thoughts, your body has room to develop its skills and its intelligence without that in the way.
Oh, that's good. Glenn, I'm ready to hit the court right now. Thank you so much for doing that. That was actually helpful for me. I'm kind of excited now to go back out there. And I was shocked when I went out and did the exercise, worked on the serve and worked on the jump shot. It was drastically different.
Yeah.
And pardon me, Dr. Hartelius, for being uncouth, but it also has application in the bedroom. This idea of moving down, getting out of my head, moving the felt sense into my body.
Yes.
And in those moments of, towards the end, if you can be more in your body, it was a vastly more enjoyable experience consistently. So thank you.
Well, not only that, but when you're in the body in that way, you can connect with your partner in a way that creates a felt sense of intimacy where you can feel each other, because that sense of rapport, resonance, that really heightens the interpersonal relationship. There's so many people who during sex will be imagining having sex with someone else, right? Having pictures. They're not even with their partner. And so when you drop into the body, you can be with your partner. You can be present. You can be harmonized with your partner in a way that creates just a beautiful intimacy and a beautiful connection, so that it becomes much more meaningful than just the physical sensations. It becomes really, the sensations become intertwined with the relationship, with the direct experience, with the powerful direct experience of that other person, and the beauty of that other person, and just the clarity of that experience is so profound that many people have never even experienced that, because we are so locked into being in our heads.
Wow. What a magnificent description, Glenn. Thank you for that. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit. One final question here for the deep dive. Glenn, my psilocybin therapy over the years really changed me. And not just as a person, but as an entrepreneur, as a founder. And one of the most impactful mystical experiences I have is this feeling where I kind of abstracted in a way to this control panel, if you will, of my own existence. Where if you think of one of those like nuclear power plants in Chernobyl, for example, where you got all these dashboards, you can pull any reading, any stat. I was there. And instead of this nuclear power plant, it was my body. I could tune up the volume of the music that was playing in my head or turn it down. I could move the sensations from the felt sense, as you said, to one leg, to the other, to my head, to my ear. And I could really experience what that particular part of the body was going through, or what its existence was like in that moment. And that experience really fundamentally changed my appreciation for my body and this human avatar that we have. And I'm curious, what is a mystical experience that still resonates with you?
I'm going to go a little bit different direction with that, because it's actually not the experiences of the psychedelics as much as the effects of the psychedelics that have remained with me. For example, I suffered with severe migraine headaches for 35 years. I lost 3 or 4 work days a month and just being flat out in bed, unable to move. And through psychedelics, those went away entirely. They have helped me with psychological flexibility, and they have helped me with depression. So it's actually been less the experiences as it has been the ways that they've had lasting impact on me. That is the most powerful for me.
Wow, that is wonderful. Thank you for that share. I've dealt with migraines too, and I'm glad to hear you got through that. So, Glenn, we could go for probably a couple hours, but we got to move on from the deep dive to the soul search speed round. So 4 questions, kind of a quick speed round style, if you can. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question number 1, Glenn. What are your 2 favorite books?
Gregory Bateson, Mind and Nature, A Necessary Unity. Second book, I'm just going to go with that one.
That's the deal. I haven't heard that one. I might have to check it out. Okay, Glenn, question number 2. You are on a desert island for 10 years all by yourself, and you only get to have one mind-altering substance. Who you got?
Modelo Negra,
What is that?
a Mexican beer.
I'm not mad at that. That's appropriate for the old beachy island vibe. Okay, this third question, Glenn, is a little bit self-serving as I am a 38-year-old guy, but if you could go back and time travel for this 10-second interval before you get zapped back to now, what would you tell 38-year-old Glenn?
I would tell him that the challenges that he has in his life, that there's a real hope to make lasting change, both through psychedelics and through attentional strategies, that it can really be different. That's what I would say.
That's good. I like that a lot. Just a gentle suggestion. Okay, last question, number 4. Glenn, you walk down the street, turn around the corner. You want to wet your beak, so you pop into a bar for a Modelo Negro, pull up a chair, and sitting there next to you is God. And he says, hey, Glenn, I'm a big fan. I got to run, though. I got this hot date with this goddess I got to get to. But I have time for one question. What is the one question you would ask God?
Couldn't you have made it a little easier?
Glenn, it has been an absolute pleasure. Where can the viewers find you, or do you have an action item or request of them?
I have, my email is glennhartelius@mac.com, and happy to entertain questions. Also, I have a website at glennhartelius.com. And yeah, that's really it.
Excellent. We'll get both of those in the links in the description. Dr. Glenn Hartelius, thank you so much for joining the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, producer Kevin, it's time to transition to the final segment of the show. This part of the show is called a slap and a clap. And the slap goes to Field Trip Health. Now, this is a very light slap because I do like them quite a bit, and perhaps an unfair standard because I was hoping for a little bit more out of them by now. And I'm starting to get the feeling that they are kind of the cute girl that's good on paper, but when that other shoe drops, their design is beautiful, but the use case is strange. I'm going to use your app and watch an app while I'm tripping on a psychedelic. And I just wonder if you guys had success with cannabis and you're trying to rinse, lather, and repeat, and wonder if your C-suite has an appreciation for how these medicines impact the nature of our existence, our consciousness, and our spirituality. A little bit of a slap to you, Field Trip. And as for the clap and a round of applause, this goes to the Canadian nonprofit TheraPsil. Now, they just challenged Health Canada to end prohibition on magic mushrooms. They also received the first approval ever for a healthy psychologist to go through psychedelic treatment so they could be a better therapist and a guide. And they have developed ties and influence at the highest levels of government. Feels like one of the good guys really making moves. So a clap to you, TheraPsil. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Psychedelic Diaries. Thank you to Dr. Glenn Hartelius, producer Kevin. I'm Ray Christian. We'll see you next time.